The Grand Justicar Kalen stood upon the precipice of judgment, the polished obsidian floor of the Chamber of Echoes reflecting the starlight that filtered through the crystalline dome far above. The air was a tangible thing, heavy with the silent pressure of unspoken fear and the low, subliminal hum of the Vexil Imperium's central consciousness matrix. Around him, the other Justicars of the Supreme Echelon stood encased in their ceremonial armor, their forms like statues carved from petrified night, their faces hidden behind masks of impassive, glowing crystal that betrayed none of the turmoil Kalen knew was raging within each of them. For generations, for millennia, this chamber had been the silent heart of an empire that spanned the spiral arm, a place of unassailable certainty where the edicts that governed 1,000 worlds were forged in the cold fire of Vexil logic. Tonight, that certainty was a fractured shard, and the silence was not one of confidence, but of a profound, collective anxiety. The subject of this anxiety was a species that had appeared at the edge of their sovereign space, a species that called themselves humans. They had not come through the lattice, the network of stabilized wormholes that the Vexil had painstakingly constructed over eons and which served as the bedrock of their power. To travel the void was to petition the Vexil. To receive their grace was to bend the knee. This was the fundamental law of the galaxy, as immutable as gravity. Yet the humans had simply arrived. Their ships, aesthetically primitive and brutally functional, had materialized in the terminus systems as if stepping from behind a veil that no one else knew existed. They had not petitioned. They had not declared their intentions. They had established a small, self-sustaining colony on a barren moon the Vexil had long ago deemed worthless, and then they had fallen silent, observing. This silence was the most unnerving act of all. In the grand, intricate dance of galactic diplomacy, where every gesture was a calculated move and every transmission a weighted gambit, the human's quietude was a deafening roar of defiance. It was the posture of a being so confident in its position that it felt no need to announce it. Justicar Vorlag, his crystalline mask glowing with a furious crimson light that signaled his agitation, broke the oppressive stillness. His voice, transmitted directly into their minds via the neural link, was sharp and resonant like the striking of a tuning fork made of glass. They mock us. They sit in our shadow in systems we declared sovereign, and they refuse to speak. This is not ignorance, it is a calculated insult. They test the boundaries of our patience, presuming our long peace has made us decadent and slow to anger. Another Justicar, Lyra, her mask a placid sapphire, countered. Her mental voice was smooth, a river flowing over stones. Or they are cautious. They have emerged into a galaxy dominated by a single monolithic power. Perhaps they study us, attempting to understand the nature of the Imperium before making formal contact. Arrogance assumes malice where caution may be the simpler truth. Caution does not explain their method of travel, Vorlag retorted, the crimson of his mask deepening. They possess a form of faster-than-light transit that bypasses the lattice. This is not a matter of diplomacy. It is a fundamental threat to the structure of our Imperium. The lattice is our control. It is the chain and the key. Through it, we ensure stability. We dictate the flow of commerce, of war, of life itself. If another species can move at will, then our control is an illusion. Our stability is a lie. Kalen remained silent, his own mask a deep, contemplative violet. He let the arguments wash over him, feeling the familiar currents of Vexil politics. Vorlag's hawkish aggression, Lyra's cautious intellectualism, the silent sycophants who would align with whoever seemed most powerful. But beneath it all, a new current was forming, one he had not felt in his long life, the cold, creeping tendrils of genuine dread. He had reviewed every scrap of data their long-range sensor platforms had gathered on the humans. Their ships were solid, radiating little in the way of exotic energies. Their colony was a collection of simple domes and towers. Their biology was fragile, based on water and carbon, utterly unremarkable. They were, by every metric the Imperium used to classify new species, a minor primitive race that had somehow stumbled upon a technological shortcut they could not possibly comprehend. And yet, there was a dissonance he could not shake. Their transmissions, when they spoke amongst themselves, were a complex tapestry of mathematics and art, of brutal logic and soaring, ephemeral emotion. Their communications discipline was absolute. Not a single stray signal had been directed toward the Imperium. They were ghosts at the gate, and Kalen could not escape the feeling that it was the Imperium that was being haunted. The Imperator, a being of immense age and power who resided in the chamber's highest spire, his physical form long since integrated into the central matrix, finally spoke. His voice was not a sound, but a wave of pure thought that resonated in the very structure of their minds, a voice that felt like the grinding of tectonic plates. The anomaly persists. The silence is a challenge. The means of their travel is a threat. A demonstration of consequence is required. The Imperator's words were never debated. They were the final weight upon the scales of judgment. Vorlag's mask flashed a triumphant blood red. A chastisement, swift and absolute. We will excise this nascent infection before it can spread. We will dismantle their pathetic outpost and leave the wreckage as a monument to their folly. The Concordance is watching. Our client species grow restless with our inaction. They must be reminded of why the Vexil rule. The Concordance, the collection of lesser species sworn to the Imperium, granted access to the lattice in exchange for tribute and fealty. They were indeed watching. Kalen had felt their subtle probes, the flicker of their clandestine communications. They saw the humans as a potential disruption, a new piece on the board that could change the ancient game. Fear and hope were a volatile mixture in the hearts of the subjugated. Lyra's sapphire mask dimmed. To strike without provocation, without even a formal dialogue, is to abandon the principles of order upon which this Imperium was founded. We will be no better than the savages we pacified in the Unification era. We must at least demand they submit. They have been demanded to submit by our very presence, Vorlag boomed. Our law is ambient. To enter our space is to accept our rule. They have refused. The provocation is their existence here. We will dispatch a punitive fleet. Let the galaxy witness the price of defiance. Let them see that the Vexil are not to be tested. Kalen felt the decision solidifying around him, a block of ice forming in the core of his being. He had seen the projections. A Vexil chastisement fleet was a thing of terrible, surgical beauty. Ships forged from living metal, armed with resonant frequency cannons that could deconstruct matter at the atomic level. The fleet would arrive, broadcast a single, final demand for surrender, and then, upon the inevitable refusal or silence, it would unmake the human colony. It would be efficient, total, and broadcast across the Concordance for all to witness. It was the Vexil way. For millennia it had worked. But as he looked at the stardusted void through the dome, he saw not the familiar, orderly patterns of Vexil dominion, but an abyss of infinite possibility. And for the first time, he felt that the Imperium was staring into a darkness that was staring back. He found his own mental voice, and it was heavier than he intended. And what if they are not what they seem? What if their silence is not arrogance, but patience? A species that has mastered travel beyond the lattice may have mastered other things as well. We are proceeding from a position of absolute ignorance. We are assuming they are a nail because the only tool we have ever used is a hammer. Vorlag's crimson light pulsed. Your caution borders on cowardice, grand justicar. They are biologicals, soft, ephemeral. Their entire history, what little our probes could glean from their faint residual signals, is a litany of self-inflicted violence and primitive tribalism. They have only just crawled out of their own planetary mud. That they found one secret does not make them gods. It makes them children playing with a weapon they cannot control. We will take it from them. The Imperator's voice descended again, final and cold as the void between stars. The decision is made. The fleet will be dispatched. The integrity of the Imperium is paramount. There will be order. The mental resonance of the final command echoed in the chamber, and then there was only silence once more. The Justicars lowered their heads in assent, their masks glowing in the dim light. Kalen did the same, but his mind was a storm. He felt as if he were standing on a cliff edge, and the ground beneath his feet was crumbling, not from a great cataclysm, but from a single hairline fracture that was propagating silently, invisibly, through the bedrock of everything he had ever known. The order was given. A fleet, a monument of Vexil power, was now en route to a lonely moon in the Terminus systems. The humans would be erased. The galaxy would be reminded of who held the power. And yet the only thing Kalen could feel was a profound and inexplicable sense of doom. He watched the starlight and wondered if the humans were watching it too, and what they were thinking in their unnerving, impenetrable silence. The Vexil chastisement fleet sliced through the void, a procession of obsidian blades leaving shimmering distortions in their wake as they moved along the controlled pathways of the lattice. Aboard the flagship, the will of the Imperator, Fleet Primarch Javal, stood on a command dais that overlooked a vast holographic display of the Terminus system. The human outpost, designated Elysian Drift by the intruders, was a tiny, insignificant speck on the moon of a barren gas giant. His fleet was an overwhelming force, an instrument of such power that its use against this target felt like using a stellar forge to crack a single seed. But the purpose was not conquest, it was communication. the most absolute and unambiguous form of communication the Imperium possessed. "We have exited the lattice," a subcommander's mind voice reported, calm and precise. "All vessels report optimal function. We are within broadcast range of the target." Javal's mandibles twitched in a gesture of grim satisfaction. He was a veteran of the Outer Rim pacifications, a true believer in the Vexel doctrine of imposed order. He saw the universe as a chaotic symphony of screaming, competing life forms, and the Vexel were the conductors, bringing harmony through absolute control. These humans were a discordant note, a screech of feedback in the grand composition. His task was to silence it. "Broadcast the Edict of Chastisement on all frequencies," Javal commanded. "Standard Imperium protocol. They will be given 1 cycle to tender their unconditional surrender and submit to Imperial integration. Their technology is to be forfeited, their colony dismantled, their personnel remanded to our custody for study." The edict, a complex waveform of language, mathematics, and raw intent, pulsed out from the fleet, washing over the silent moon. It was a message of pure power, an offer of survival in exchange for total submission. On the holographic display, the human colony remained inert. No energy spikes, no launch warnings, no frantic transmissions. The silence was absolute. Javal had expected as much. Primitive species often froze in the face of overwhelming power, their minds unable to process the scale of their own impending annihilation. The cycle passed, the silence from Elysian drift held. It was no longer the silence of caution, it was the silence of defiance. Or perhaps Javal considered the silence of utter, paralyzing terror. It did not matter which. The result was the same. "The cycle is complete," the subcommander stated. "No response." Javal felt a cold satisfaction. The demonstration could now proceed. Target the primary habitat dome, a single, focused volley from the forward resonance cannons. Let their end be as swift and insignificant as their existence. Broadcast the visual feed to the concordance. Let them watch. From the prows of the Vexel warships, lances of pure, shimmering distortion erupted, converging on the small human outpost. They were not lasers or plasma. They were waves of precisely tuned energy that resonated with the bonds holding matter together, causing them to violently dissociate. The effect was instantaneous and total. The primary dome and the structures around it did not explode. They simply ceased to be. One moment, a structure of metal and polymer stood on the lunar surface. The next, there was only a cloud of rapidly expanding, incandescent dust and a freshly glazed crater where it had been. It was a clean, efficient, and horrifyingly complete erasure. A murmur of approval went through the bridge crew. The power of the Imperium was reaffirmed. The discordant note was silenced. Javal watched the dust cloud settle on the display, a faint shimmer of Vexel energy dissipating into the vacuum. The lesson had been delivered. And then the universe held its breath. Back in the Chamber of Echoes on Vex Prime, the Justicars watched the same feed on a massive, wall-sized data screen. The destruction was absolute. Vorlag's mask glowed with vindication. "It is done. The threat is neutralized. The concordance sees our strength, our resolve. Order is restored." But Kalen could not share his sentiment. He stared at the image of the glowing crater, and the sense of dread that had been his constant companion for days did not dissipate. It intensified. The human response to the Vexel fleet's arrival had been nothing. Their response to the ultimatum had been nothing. And now their response to their own annihilation was nothing. There was no desperate cry for mercy, no final curse hurled across the void, no retaliatory strike from a hidden weapon. There was only the profound, cosmic emptiness of space, an emptiness that now seemed to be mocking them, accusing them. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The fleet Primarch Javal, his feed still active in a corner of the display, reported his forces were holding position, scanning for any residual threats. There were none. The system was clean. The humans were gone. The silence from the Terminus system was a perfect, unbroken void. The silence in the Chamber of Echoes was a suffocating shroud. The Justicars stood, waiting for a conclusion that felt as though it had not yet arrived. They had won. The display in front of them was unequivocal proof of their victory. So why did it feel, with every passing second, more like the prelude to a comprehensive and unimaginable defeat? Kalen found himself focusing on a single, absurd detail. The timing. The Vexel fleet had arrived, broadcast its warning, waited for 1 cycle, and fired. The entire sequence from their arrival to the obliteration of the colony had been executed with flawless Vexel efficiency. And now they waited. Why were they waiting? For what? It was as if the entire Imperium was holding its breath, anticipating a countermove from an entity they had just confirmed was utterly destroyed. The logic of it was nonsensical, yet the feeling was undeniable. They had struck a strange, silent creature, and now they stood with their weapon raised, listening to the silence, more afraid than they had been before the blow landed. It was exactly 14 minutes after the destruction of Elysian Drift that it happened. It did not begin with a ship appearing or a weapon firing. It began with a signal, not to the Vexel fleet, not even to Vex Prime. It was a signal sent everywhere at once, to every member of the Concordance, to every hidden outpost, to every listening station in the galaxy. It bypassed every Vexel encryption key, every communications firewall, as if they were simply not there. It was a broadcast of impossible reach and clarity, and its point of origin was a world the Vexel had only ever designated as Sol 3. Earth. On the main display in the Chamber of Echoes, the feed from Javal's victorious fleet was replaced. The image that appeared was stark and simple. A single human, a female, seated in a plain room. She was not in a military uniform or elaborate robes. She wore simple, dark clothing. Her face was calm, her expression one of deep, weary sorrow. Behind her, there was only a window looking out onto a blue sky. There were no symbols of power, no banners, no weapons. There was only her, and the profound, unnerving stillness in her eyes. Her voice, when she spoke, was translated simultaneously into the native tongues and conceptual frameworks of every species listening. The translation was flawless, capturing not just the meaning but the emotional timbre, the subtle notes of regret and resolve. To the assembled species of this galactic arm, she began, her voice steady and clear. My name is Eva Rostova. I speak for a unified humanity. Minutes ago, the Vexel Imperium, in an act of unprovoked aggression, destroyed our scientific and exploratory outpost, Elysian Drift. The lives of all personnel stationed there were extinguished. We do not broadcast this message to announce a war or to call for retribution. We broadcast this to announce an end. Vorlag's mask flared a violent red. A pre-recorded message of defiance from their homeworld, arrogant to the last. They think their final words will stir rebellion. We will silence their world as we did their moon. But Kalen held up a hand, a gesture that demanded silence. His own violet mask was frozen, his entire being focused on the woman's words. There was no defiance in her voice. There was something far more powerful. There was pity. The Vexel Imperium, she continued, her gaze direct and piercing as if she were looking into the heart of every being watching, has built its dominion on a single fundamental principle, control of interstellar travel. The lattice is their scepter and their crown. They have decreed that to travel the stars is to be subject to their will. For millennia, you have accepted this as a fundamental truth of the universe. Today, you will learn that it is not. It is a cage whose bars were forged from a lie, the lie of scarcity. The view behind her changed. It was no longer a blue sky, but a complex, rotating schematic of a drive system. It was elegant, profoundly simple in its core principles, yet light years beyond anything the Vexel had ever conceived. Equations and theoretical proofs scrolled beside it, translated and comprehensible to any species with a rudimentary grasp of physics. Humanity does not use the lattice, Rostova stated, her voice devoid of triumph. Our vessels do not travel through manipulated wormholes. We travel through the foundational substrate of reality itself. We call it quantum entanglement tunneling. It is not a manipulation of space-time. It is a conversation with it. Our method is instantaneous. The distance between any 2 points in the universe is, for us, 0. A wave of disbelief and horror washed through the Chamber of Echoes. It was impossible, a flagrant lie designed to sow chaos. But the schematics, the mathematics, they were flawless. Kalen's mind, a finely honed instrument of Vexel logic, raced through the equations. They were sound, they were elegant, they were true. And in their truth lay the utter annihilation of the Vexel Imperium's entire reason for being. The Vexel believe their power comes from a resource they control, Rostova said, her image returning to the forefront. This is the flaw at the heart of all empires built on coercion. True power is not something that can be hoarded. It is something that must be shared. The Vexel attacked us because they feared what we represent, a future they cannot control. They were correct to be afraid, but they chose the wrong response. They believe they have just demonstrated their power by destroying a few of our people. We will now demonstrate ours. Her expression hardened, not with anger, but with a profound and terrible gravity. We are not going to attack the Vexel fleet. We are not going to wage war on their worlds. We are not going to take their place as rulers of this galaxy. We are going to do something far more effective. We are going to set you all free." She made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with her hand. The full schematics, theoretical frameworks, engineering principles, and material science for quantum entanglement tunneling are now being uploaded. Open source, to everyone, to all of you. The Vexel kept you in a cage by holding the only key. We are not giving you a new key. We are dissolving the cage. In the Chamber of Echoes, secondary data streams began to flood the displays. Kalen watched in stunned horror as, one by one, the icons representing the Concordance worlds flared with activity. They were receiving the human data package, the entire technological basis for humanity's FTL travel. A gift of unimaginable value was being given away freely to everyone in the galaxy. "From this moment forward," Rostova's voice concluded, "the Vexel lattice is obsolete. Their control is broken. What you do with this newfound freedom is your own choice. Build, explore, connect. Form federations based on mutual respect, not on fear. The galaxy is vast, and it belongs to all who inhabit it, not to those who would seek to own it. We ask for nothing in return except that you remember the price that was paid today at Elysian Drift. Remember that progress cannot be stopped by violence, and that a lie, no matter how powerful, cannot survive the light of truth. This broadcast will now end. The duration of this transmission from our first word to the completion of the data transfer was 14 minutes. The screen went black. For a moment there was absolute, perfect silence in the chamber. The only sound was the faint, subliminal hum of the now useless central matrix. Then, the real-time political overlay of the Imperium began to collapse. One by one, the symbols of fealty from the concordant species began to extinguish. The Cathar Regency, a warrior race that had chafed under Vexel rule for centuries, was the first to go dark. Then the Elythian technocracy, their tribute fleets visibly altering course on the galactic map, turning back towards their own systems. The Shul Merchants Guild, the bioforms of the Signian Drift, the crystalline thinkers of Xylos, all of them in a silent, cascading wave of revolution, severed their ties to the Imperium. They were not declaring war. They were simply leaving. The Vexel Imperium, a structure that had stood for 100,000 years, an empire that had seemed as permanent as the stars themselves, was not being destroyed by a fleet or an army. It was being dismantled, piece by piece, by a single, 14-minute-long act of radical generosity. Justicar Vorlag fell to his knees, the crimson light of his mask sputtering like a dying ember. His mental voice was a fractured shriek of disbelief and rage. They did not fight back. They made us irrelevant. Kalen stood motionless, his mind a void. The horror was not in the loss of territory or power. It was in the sheer, elegant precision of the human response. They had understood the Vexel perfectly. They had identified the single pillar upon which the entire Imperium rested, and they had pulverized it, not with a weapon, but with an idea. They had absorbed a violent blow, and had responded not by returning the violence, but by fundamentally changing the reality of the entire galaxy. They had turned the other cheek, and in doing so, had shattered the arm of the one who struck them. He looked at the galactic map. It was a ruin. The vast, interconnected web of the Imperium was now just a scattering of isolated Vexel worlds, adrift in a galaxy that no longer needed them, a galaxy that no longer feared them. The humans had not ended their empire with a war. They had ended it with a gift. And as he stared at the blank screen where Eva Rostova's face had been, Kalen finally understood the profound depth of his miscalculation. They had not been facing a rival for power. They had been facing a fundamental force of nature they could not even begin to comprehend. The Vexel had fought a battle. The humans had ended a paradigm, and it had taken them just 14 minutes. The days that followed the broadcast were a slow, agonizing dissolution. The Vexel Imperium did not die in fire. It evaporated like mist in a morning sun. The chastisement fleet, still orbiting the dead moon of Elysian Drift, became a symbol of pathetic irony, a mighty sword rendered useless because the concept of swords had been made obsolete. Primarch Javal, his mind unable to reconcile the strategic reality, maintained his position, a silent, impotent monument to a bygone era. On Vex Prime and the core worlds, panic gave way to a hollow despair. The intricate economic and social structures built upon the lattice monopoly crumbled. The flow of tribute ceased. The off-world labor forces, now possessing the means to travel home, simply vanished. The Vexel, a species that had defined itself by its mastery over others, was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Justicar Vorlag, his spirit broken, retreated into seclusion, his crimson mask extinguished forever. The Imperator fell silent, its ancient consciousness seemingly unable to process a reality so far removed from the one it had curated for millennia. The Chamber of Echoes, once the heart of galactic power, became a tomb, its silence now one of genuine emptiness. It fell to Kalen to navigate the ruins. He who had harbored the deepest doubts was now the only one left with the clarity to see the path forward, however narrow and dark it might be. The old way was dead. The Imperium was a ghost, a memory. The only choice was to face the new reality, to speak to the architects of their undoing. With the last vestiges of his authority, Kalen sent a single, humble transmission. It was not a demand or a threat, but a simple, direct request for communication addressed to the human ambassador, Eva Rostova. He did not know if they would answer. A species capable of such a profound strategic masterstroke might have no interest in speaking to the remnants of their defeated, though never fought, enemy. He waited, the hours stretching into an agony of uncertainty, feeling for the first time the true weight of being a petitioner, a supplicant before a power far greater than his own. The response came not as a grand, formal address, but as a simple, encrypted data packet containing a set of coordinates and a time. It was an invitation, not to a neutral star system, but to Earth itself, to their homeworld. The audacity and the trust inherent in such a gesture were staggering. He was being invited into the heart of their power, not as a prisoner, but as a diplomat. Kalen went alone. He traveled in a small, unarmed courier ship, using the last functioning lattice gateway to make the long, ponderous journey. As his ship translated into the Sol system, he was not met by a fleet of warships, but by a single, elegant human vessel that guided him into orbit around a world of breathtaking, chaotic beauty. Swirls of white cloud over deep blue oceans, continents of vibrant green and stark brown, and at night, a glittering web of golden light that spoke of a population of billions. It was a world teeming with a kind of disorganized, vibrant life that was utterly alien to the sterile, ordered perfection of Vexel worlds. He was received in a room that mirrored the one from the broadcast. It was simple, functional, and held no trappings of power. Eva Rostova was there, her expression as calm and unreadable as it had been on the screen. She was flanked by two other humans, a male and a female, both dressed in the same simple, dark attire. They offered him a seat. The gesture was one of equals, a political fiction so profound it was almost insulting, yet Kalen knew it was sincere. Grand Justikar, Rostova began, her voice the same as he remembered, calm and resonant. We are grateful you accepted our invitation. We imagine you have many questions. Kalen's mental voice felt small in the quiet room. Questions do not begin to describe the state of my mind, ambassador. I have come to understand. What you did, it was not war. It was something else entirely. Something for which my people have no name. The human male, introduced as David Chen, a strategist, spoke. We call it a paradigm shift. War is a zero-sum game. You seek to diminish your enemy's capacity to fight. We saw that your capacity to fight was inextricably linked to your capacity to control. The two were the same. Therefore, to end your ability to control was to end any potential for a galaxy-spanning war before it began. It was the most logical and most ethical course of action. Ethical? Kalen's mind recoiled at the word. You engineered the collapse of our entire civilization. Billions of Vexel now face a future of chaos and uncertainty. Our society is unmade. You call this ethical? It was Rostova who answered, her gaze unwavering. We did not unmake your society, Justikar. We removed the artificial construct that was holding it together. Your Imperium was built on the subjugation of others. It was a system that generated suffering on a galactic scale, all to preserve a sense of order for your species alone. What we did was end that subjugation. The chaos your people now face is the consequence of your own choices, made over millennia. It is the sudden, painful realization that your foundation was built on sand. We did not cause the weakness in your foundation. We merely exposed it to the tide. Her words were like shards of ice, cold and precise, and they struck at the heart of the truth he had been avoiding. The Vexel had grown decadent and arrogant, their entire culture predicated on a power they had not earned, but merely hoarded. But the cost, Kalen pushed, the memory of the glowing crater still seared into his consciousness. Your own people at Elysian Drift, you sacrificed them. A profound sadness entered Rostova's eyes. We did not sacrifice them. They were murdered. Every single one of them was a volunteer, a scientist, an explorer. They knew the risks. They knew the Vexel Imperium would likely respond to our presence with violence. They were stationed there as part of a terrible, necessary calculus. We had to prove to the galaxy, beyond any doubt, the nature of your Imperium. We had to let you strike the first blow, a blow against a peaceful, unarmed outpost. Their deaths were tragic, and we mourn them with every fiber of our being. But their loss purchased the freedom of 1,000 worlds and prevented a war that would have claimed trillions of lives. It was a price paid in tears, Justicar, but it was a price we were willing to pay to avoid a cost paid in blood. The third human, a woman named Dr. Aris Thorne, a xenosociologist, leaned forward slightly. Your species views power as a finite resource to be held. We view it as a network to be grown. By giving away our FTL technology, we did not lose power. We gained countless potential partners. We transformed a galaxy of subjects into a galaxy of peers. We did not seek to rule your concordance. We sought to dissolve it and invite its members to join a true community. One based on voluntary participation and shared knowledge. Kalen felt the last pillars of his Vexel worldview crumble. They had seen the galaxy as a hierarchy to be climbed and dominated. The humans saw it as a web to be woven. Their perspective was so fundamentally different, so much larger in scope, that he realized the Vexel had never been in a competition with them. They had been a footnote in a story the humans were writing on a cosmic scale. Why, Kalen finally asked, the single word containing the weight of his entire civilization's confusion. Why do this? Why not keep your advantage? Why not use your superior technology to build your own empire, one that would dwarf ours? Ristova's expression softened. Because we have been where you are. Our own history is a long, bloody lesson in the failure of empires. We have dominated and subjugated each other for thousands of years on this very world. We have learned through immense suffering that power built on control is an illusion. It is a cancer that consumes the host. It breeds resentment, rebellion, and endless cycles of violence. We have finally, precariously, moved beyond that paradigm. To inflict it upon another species, upon an entire galaxy, would be the ultimate betrayal of every lesson we have ever learned. It would be a moral and spiritual regression from which we might never recover. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. We do not want to rule the galaxy, Justicar. We want to be a part of it, a responsible, contributing part. And that was not possible as long as your Imperium held it in a state of arrested development. Kalen was silent for a long time, processing the sheer philosophical chasm that separated their two species. The Vexel had sought order through stasis. The humans sought progress through chaos and connection. He finally understood the horror he had felt in the Chamber of Echoes. It was not the horror of defeat. It was the horror of revelation, the terrifying, vertigo-inducing realization that his entire perception of the universe had been fundamentally and irrevocably wrong. What happens now? He asked, his voice a whisper in his own mind. For my people, without the Imperium, without our purpose, we are lost. No, you are not, Ristova said, a flicker of genuine warmth in her eyes. You are free as the rest of the galaxy. Your people are formidable thinkers, engineers, artists. Your rigid social structure has stifled that for eons. Now you can build something new, something based on your own merits, not on the servitude of others. It will be difficult, it will be painful, but it will be real, and humanity will be there to help if you ask for it. The offer was as staggering as the gift of their technology. After what the Vexel had done, they were offering aid, not as conquerors demanding reparations, but as peers offering support. It was an act of grace so profound it bordered on the illogical, and yet it was perfectly in keeping with everything they had done. Kalen rose from his seat, a gesture of finality. He had his answer. It was not one he had expected, but it was one that settled the storm in his mind, replacing it with a quiet, terrifying, and exhilarating sense of a new beginning. We will need guidance, he admitted, the words tasting strange and foreign. My people will not understand this, but I will make them understand. As the diplomatic channels solidified in the following weeks, and the first, tentative steps were taken toward building a new galactic community, humanity shared more than just technology. They shared their data, their history, their art, their philosophy. And with that sharing came a new, collaborative project, the complete high-fidelity mapping of the local galactic cluster. With thousands of species now equipped with instantaneous travel, the exploration of the cosmos began on a scale never before imagined. New worlds were discovered, new life forms cataloged, and the blank spaces on the map began to fill in. It was during one of these deep-range mapping expeditions, a joint human Vexel science mission led by Dr. Thorne and a reformed Vexel scholar, that they found it. Kalen and Ristova were in a communication hub, observing the incoming data streams from across the newly opened galaxy. when the priority alert flashed on their screens. The signal was not from within their galaxy. It originated from the abyssal, terrifying darkness of intergalactic space, aimed not at any one star, but at the galactic core itself. It was impossibly ancient, its waveform degraded by a journey of millions of years, yet its structure was undeniably artificial. It was not a message of greeting. It was not a beacon of discovery. It was a single, repeating pattern, encoded in the universal language of mathematics and fundamental particle decay rates. A warning. Dr. Thorne's voice came over the comms, strained with a mixture of awe and terror. We've spent days decoding the core layers of the signal. It's a quarantine notice, a celestial hazard buoy. It's been broadcasting for at least 2 million years, maybe more. It doesn't warn about a species or an empire. A complex diagram appeared on the main screen. It was not a ship. It was not a creature. It was a waveform, a pattern of resonant energy that the ancient, long-dead broadcasters had depicted as a kind of cosmic predator. A phenomenon that moved through the void and, according to the deeply disturbing equations embedded in the signal, fed on the collective consciousness of sentient life. It didn't destroy worlds. It rendered them silent, leaving behind entire civilizations of mindless, empty shells. The signal designates a threat vector, Thorne continued, her voice trembling. It's cyclical. It hibernates for eons in the deep void, then emerges on a predictable path. According to the message, the next emergence is imminent, and its path is projected to intersect with our spiral arm. Kalen stared at the screen, at the alien, terrifyingly elegant mathematics describing the approaching threat. He looked at Rostova, whose face was a mask of cold, focused resolve. The 14-minute event that had shattered his reality, that had seemed like the most significant moment in galactic history, suddenly felt small, like a squabble between children in the shadow of an approaching tidal wave. His people had spent 100,000 years building an empire to control a single spiral arm. They had been obsessed with their own power, their own dominion, blind to the true scale of the universe. The humans, in their first act upon the galactic stage, had shattered that introspective paradigm. They had forced the galaxy to look up, to look out. And in doing so, they had inadvertently given them all the one thing they would need to face the coming darkness: a chance. The freedom to travel, to communicate, to unite. Your people sought to control the galaxy, Rostova said softly, her eyes locked on the ominous data, her voice a whisper that carried the weight of a new, far greater burden. It seems now we must all learn how to defend it. Kalen looked from the warning of the ancient, forgotten race to the calm, determined face of the human ambassador. The horror of his empire's end was a distant memory, replaced by a new, more profound fear, but also something else entirely. A sense of shared purpose, a feeling of standing with a partner on the edge of a great and terrible unknown. The story of the Vexel Imperium was over. But the story of the galaxy, a story that would now be written by humans and Vexel and 1,000 other species standing side by side, had only just begun.